I'm wrapped in a sheet, freezing my behind off in that cell, trying to get answers from people that wouldn't give me any answers.
Then he changed his story and said that Richard Glossip had paid him to carry out the murder.
Just in a letter, and I met with him yesterday. The nature of what we talked about.
Have to assume that if the state supports it, that the Supreme Court will support it, and so we will.
Now, the Supreme Court granted Glossip a temporary stay, so they have time to look over 2 lawsuits.
Richard Glossip is widely recognized as an innocent man marching to his demise after receiving capital punishment for a crime he never committed. How did Richard Glossip get wrapped up in this mess? The crime and sentence. Glossip was sentenced to his demise for the 1997 slaying of Barry Van Treese inside a seedy Best Budget inn that Van Treese owned on the outskirts of Oklahoma City. No physical evidence linked Glossip, the motel's live-in manager, to the crime. Instead, the case against him was built almost exclusively on the testimony of a 19-year-old maintenance man named Justin Sneed, who admitted to bludgeoning Van Treese but said it was all Glossip's idea, claiming that Glossip had promised him money for it. In exchange for testifying against Glossip, Sneed avoided capital punishment and was sentenced to life without parole. One of the key points of contention in Glossip's case is the lack of physical evidence tying him directly to the crime. There were no fingerprints, DNA, or other forensic evidence linking Glossip to the slaying scene. The case primarily relied on Sneed's testimony and circumstantial evidence, such as Glossip's allegedly suspicious behavior after the slaying. Despite the absence of forensic proof, Glossip was found guilty. Glossip insisted on his actual innocence and refused to accept a plea bargain.
Why don't you talk about that? We work in the rule of law here, okay? And let me tell you what.
I have looked at the evidence and I think Richard Glossip's guilty.
Paid to police never included me in anything. I was never included until Memo and them put that thought.
In July 1998, an Oklahoma jury convicted Glossip of the slaying and sentenced him to his demise. In 2001, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals unanimously threw out that conviction, calling the case extremely weak and finding Glossip had received unconstitutionally ineffective assistance of counsel. In August 2004, a second Oklahoma jury convicted Glossip of the slaying and sentenced him to his demise. Glossip complained that prosecutors had intimidated his defense attorney into resigning. However, in April 2007, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed the sentence, with 2 judges in the majority, 1 judge especially concurring, and 2 judges dissenting. Glossip attracted the advocacy of Sister Helen Pregene, but failed to get the clemency board to consider letters from Sneed's family, who believe Sneed is lying. Glossip has always insisted on his innocence, and over the last decade, evidence that he was wrongly convicted has steadily mounted. Much of this evidence supports Glossip's contention that Sneed, a chronic drug user who demonstrated unpredictable bouts of violence, carried out the crime and only later set up Glossip as the mastermind. New witnesses have come forward to counter the state's portrayal of Sneed as a hapless dolt who took direction from Glossip, testifying that Sneed was cunning, manipulative, and quite capable of slaying a man on his own.
I can't stand there and confess to a crime I didn't commit, so you can just shove me in a prison somewhere and say, hey, Brian. I truly had nothing to do with it. I would not have hurt Barry in any way, shape, or form, and I surely wouldn't have.
I've accompanied 6 human beings to execution. Richard would be the 7th man.
He was offering me, kept changing, up to a point to...
Most recently, the state disclosed evidence that Sneed made misstatements at trial that undermined his credibility. While he was in jail, Sneed was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and prescribed lithium to manage it. However, when he testified against Glossip, Sneed denied ever seeing a psychiatrist and said he had no idea why he'd been given lithium. Oklahoma Attorney General Gentner Drummond highlighted these misstatements in his recent brief to the court, seeking to vacate Glossip's conviction. He argued that Sneed's mental health disorder combined with his chronic drug use could have negatively affected Sneed's ability to properly recall key facts at trial. Yet in the end, the state reached the difficult conclusion that the conviction of Glossip was obtained with the benefit of material misstatements to the jury by its key witness. In its opinion, the court dismissed Drummond's conclusions and explained away Sneed's misstatements by speculating that the star witness was more than likely in denial of his mental health disorders. The defense didn't cross-examine Sneed about his diagnosis, the court suggested, because doing so would have demonstrated that he was mentally vulnerable to Glossip's manipulation and control. In rejecting Drummond's request to vacate Glossip's conviction, the court blithely concluded that there was no reason to further stay Glossip's punishment. They said because Glossip has not made the requisite showing of likely success in further appeals or irreparable harm from any denial of his claims, he is not entitled to a stay of punishment. This is not the first time Glossip has come close to the last days of his life.
The Supreme Court halts execution of Oklahoma death row inmate Richard Glossip.
The team has tried to hide everything that they've done. One of the prosecutors, literally, we have it in writing.
We are thrilled that the court granted this stay of execution. This is something that we've been asking for.
Of realization that, hey, finally somebody in the state is listening. And
Glossip's close calls. Glossip has had so many close calls with his fatal sentencing that it is almost unbelievable. On July 1, 2022, Glossip was one of 25 end row inmates to be scheduled for their punishment in Oklahoma. His date was set for September 22, 2022. But on August 16, 2022, Oklahoma Governor Kevin granted him a stay, and his date was moved to December 8, 2022. On November 3, 2022, Governor Stitt again granted a stay for Glossip, allowing time for the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals to address his pending legal proceedings. On January 24, 2023, Glossip's punishment was rescheduled again after Attorney General Gentner Drummond requested a new timetable to accommodate for staff shortages within the Department of Corrections. In March, Drummond announced his office would seek to stay the punishment until 2024 to allow an independent counsel to review the case. After the independent review was released, his office filed a motion to vacate the slaying conviction of Mr. Glossip in April 2023. Drummond did not proclaim Glossip's innocence, but he did note in a news release there was enough doubt of his guilt that the capital punishment and his conviction for the slaying are inappropriate. The case then went back to the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals.
I said I seen him that morning, and I've always said from day one that it was 7:30 the night before.
Punishment, we've become accustomed to there being more, there being a confession, there being videotaping. The evidence does not seem to be substantial enough to warrant that, and I believe that's why.
Peter walking on water in the gospel story. I say to him, Richard, you are not going to die.
On April 20, 2023, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals ruled against Richard Glossip, despite a motion from the state's Attorney General asking the court to vacate Glossip's conviction and remand the case to a lower court. This ruling meant that barring clemency being granted or any further appeals to the U.S. Supreme Court, Glossip would be fatally punished by lethal injection on May 18. In May 2023, Glossip's attorneys filed a petition for a stay to the U.S. Supreme Court, citing new evidence that has come to light, which sheds doubt on the reliability of the state's star witness, Justin Sneed, the man who was convicted of actually carrying out the slaying of Barry Van Treese. Subsequent to this filing, Oklahoma has filed an unopposed response to the petition. On May 5, the Supreme Court halted Glossip's May 18 punishment. Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt has indicated that he has taken an oath to follow the law and therefore will not intervene in stopping Glossip's punishment unless the courts step in to act based on either new evidence or procedural error. Glossip has come close to the last day of his life at least 7 times over the period of a few months. The impact of this situation on him mentally cannot be imagined. He has even had his last meal 3 times now and still is fighting against the impending doom of his possible punishment.
Richard Glossip and the justice of his death sentence.
Just understanding that he was a 19-year-old kid under a lot of pressure. And
I'm going to walk in there and I'm going to be fine. I'm going to walk into the death chamber and I'm going to sit down on the gurney of my own opinion, it seems, even though the courts in Oklahoma convicted him of murder.
Controversy on lethal injection. There has been a slew of controversy against the procedure, conduct, and drugs used in Oklahoma's capital punishments. On October 13, 2014, the Oklahoma Attorney General said the state did not have an adequate supply of lethal drugs and delayed the punishment of Glossip and 2 other inmates. A year later, the U.S. Supreme Court halted fatal punishments in Oklahoma until it decided on lethal injection drugs. Governor Mary Fallin stayed Glossip's punishment after the Department of Corrections received potassium acetate instead of potassium chloride, and Glossip's punishment was reset for November 6, 2015. Then, out of nowhere, on October 1, 2015, Governor General Scott Pruitt asked the Court of Criminal Appeals to issue an indefinite stay of all scheduled punishments in Oklahoma, citing the Department of Corrections' acquisition of a drug contrary to protocol. The next day, the request was granted.
Doctor,
What your family has gone through, no family should ever have to endure. Any crime against Mary Van Treese, and I would have never thought of paying anybody to commit.
But there's still time for Governor Stitt to step in and grant Glossip a 60-day stay.
There are very few times that we come to a precipice in our life where what we do.
I must say again for this hearing that I did not know about Justice Snead's plan to commit against Mr. Van Treese, let alone to murder him. I know that in the chaos, I'm sorry that in my fear and confusion, I caused anyone engaged closely and to take a stand about it.
In a startling situation, it was reported that Oklahoma Corrections Department officials used potassium acetate to punish Charles Frederick Warner on January 15, 2015, contrary to the protocol decided. An attorney representing Glossip and other Oklahoma Endro inmates said logs from Warner's punishment, initialed by a prison staff member, indicated the use of potassium chloride. However, an autopsy report showed 12 vials of potassium acetate were used. Growing support. Glossip, 60 years old now, remains hopeful his life will be spared so he and his wife can continue to build one together, maybe outside the walls of the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. Married just last year, their life together has so far been limited to visits and phone calls. A growing pool of supporters that includes not only his wife and attorneys, but media star and entrepreneur Kim Kardashian, TV talk show host Dr. Phil McGraw, Innocence Project board member Jason Flom, Oklahoma Attorney General Gentner Drummond, and a bipartisan group of 62 Oklahoma legislators are hoping to save his life, pointing to a myriad of questions about his guilt and the process that landed him on the row. After the recent stay of punishment, Glossip's attorney, in a statement, thanked Oklahoma legislators for taking a deeper look at the case and said he was very grateful to the U.S. Supreme Court for doing the right thing in stopping Richard Glossip's unlawful punishment. That's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.